Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning or afternoon or evening, based on wherever you are based. We've got a really good short jam-packed session for you today on the topic on screen: navigating legal operations bottlenecks without slowing the business. And this is really intended to be a practical, insight-driven, practical tip-driven, and informal conversation about legal operations and how it can be positioned as a strategic enabler within the business. And we've got a really great guest in Ron, who I'll introduce shortly, who has a great deal of experience in this space and can talk to some of that in the next 15 or 20 minutes. I'm Shaz. I'm a Senior Director of Client Solutions at Neota, a no-code workflow automation platform. I'm joined by Carl Edwards. Carl, if you want to briefly introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Shaz. Great to be back here with you and the Neota team again. I'm Carl. I'm Chief Growth Officer here at LOWCODEMINDS. We're a specialist boutique systems integrator. We help our customers really drive speed in the business through, adoption of automation and new technologies. We spoke a lot on the last session about how legal delays often impact core business operations. So really keen to get some insights from Ron today, and I think we'll have a great discussion on ideas how we can solve those going forward.
Fantastic. And yes, we have our guest, Ron Lambert. Ron Lambert is Chief Legal Officer of Output Services Group, where he leads the company's legal compliance and risk functions, and has over 25 years of experience spanning large public companies and startups. Ron, I'll let you give yourself a proper introduction there.
And no, first of all, thanks for having me here. As you mentioned, Chief Legal Officer of Output Services Group. We are a US-based critical communications provider, really on the forefront of our digital transformation. I've been practicing for a little over 25 years, as you mentioned. Large law firms, large public companies, as well as smaller agile companies, startups, as well as private equity-backed companies where I've had to either mature and or start the legal.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's great, and really excited to get a bit dive into some of these topics with you both. I think we start at the top. We talked about bottlenecks in the title. We've talked about the potential for slowing the business. Where do these kinds of issues tend to show up? Where are these bottlenecks? Ron, I suppose, what kind of first comes to mind when you hear that term?
Probably first and foremost in the contract request and negotiation function. In general, whether it's a mature company or a startup, to the extent you don't really have an appropriate process, like a contract request process, contract approval and review process, you're really going to be stuck with bottlenecks. I'd say the other thing is making sure that you have the appropriate template agreements. It's really important to start with something that, again, fits the majority, not all, but the majority of whether it's your client, primarily client, or your vendor contracts, something to start with so you're not starting from scratch all the time. Those are primarily the principal bottlenecks.
Those are sort of the low-hanging fruit that you see, at least the most obvious sort of bottlenecks that appear.
Yeah, I mean, there's also ones, invariably something's going to come up, right, in whatever the deal is, and you're not always going to have the answer. But again, if you have a process, a risk profile, something that you can always take really a look at what comes up so that you can quickly collaborate with your cross-functional team members and or render some advice as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. Carl, does that kind of accord with your perspective? I know you come from more of a technology and consulting viewpoint here. What kind of patterns are you seeing across organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo what Ron shared there, right? I think key things for me that always stand out with clients, right? Duplication is probably the biggest killer of scale, right? If you look at multinational companies, every region, every team, every lawyer kind of reinventing the wheel, right? Different templates, different processes, same pain. Centralizing and standardizing workflows is really the first step to real scalability. And still we live in a world where, manual work really is a silent killer, right? Too much still lives in spreadsheets, it lives in inboxes, it lives in, water cooler side chats. You can't scale, Shaz, when people are chasing versions instead of moving deals forward. So I think automating that routine, freeing the humans up to really drive the value add and drive the conversations forward is absolutely key. But I think the key thing is there's always a disconnection between systems and teams, right? Sales, legal, finance, to Ron's point, spot on. They're all working in silos. that slows everything down. Adopting low code, no code technology to automate and drive that integration is really where you're going to see the velocity and impact that's really going to drive and improve the business.
Absolutely. What is the cost here? I mean, the blockers that we're talking about, if those, when this happens, what is actually happening to the business? What are the real costs and harms that occur here?
I mean, from a business impact standpoint, right? I mean, we regularly see clients, they lose weeks on every deal because contracts are coming in between sales and legal. There's no defined intake. And I think once we automate that triage, you see turnaround times drop by as much as 40%, right? And I think we have one major client, major enterprise client, they've used email to track contract reviews, right? Nobody knew who had the ball at any particular time. Integrating approvals into a single workflow means that deals move month on month, and then they're closing much more rapidly as a result. And that's a measurable impact to the value to the business and driving overall revenue impact.
And Ron, in the legal function, how do you feel that cost? I mean, and does it vary from going from small startups where you work to the largest public companies? What does that feel like in the organization?
It does. When I heard Carl speak, I was jokingly going to say it costs your job, right?
Yeah.
But in all honesty, I mean, legal can't be a blocker, and whether it's a large company or a small company, delaying revenue just isn't acceptable, right? And obviously, it becomes more important with the smaller company, which is more dependent on that revenue. But it's also just not the client deals, right? To the extent that you're delaying vendor or procurement deals, that's going to delay development. It's going to delay revenue. It also just creates a lot of inefficiencies. And the most important thing is you also need to have an internal reputation as a business enabler versus being a bottleneck or an obstacle. Well, if you're an obstacle, your business clients are going to find a way to bypass you, and that's just going to open up a whole nother can of worms.
That change management piece is so important. Being someone who's seen as a change enabler rather than something to get around is so critical, right?
Very much so. I mean, I've always said I always want to be at the table, be invited into a deal, as opposed to my clients saying, we don't want to bring legal in. We deal with a lot of counterparties, frankly, where the business clients prefer working directly with our business clients and our legal department, and don't even want to bring their lawyers into the fray.
Yeah. And Carl, from your view, again, from this sort of technology consultant perspective, what is the most impactful shift the organization can make? Is it a cultural shift? Is it a technology shift? What is it that really moves the needle for these organizations?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great and expansive question, Shad. Right? I mean, if you look at it and go back to what Ron and I were saying there, right? I think the biggest thing here is how do we impact the operating model? Legal teams deal with floods of requests on a daily basis. We talked about triage, but I think the key thing, the two key areas I would always advise customers to look at: where can you automate repeatable tasks, right? Because the value of lawyers dealing with high volume, low risk things, NDAs, approvals, contract renewals, is a waste of time. Most of that can be automated. Let the humans focus on exceptions and judgment calls. That's how you get the time back. And I think equally, we should be empowering the legal team to own workflows, not just IT. When legal ops depends on IT for every change, progress stalls. Low code, no code platforms let legal design, do their own testing, evolve their own processes without waiting on internal teams. And that really has a massive measurable impact on how successful those teams are in day-to-day turnaround.
Absolutely. And then the corollary, the other side of that is, Ron, is that you can put the technology in place, you can make those changes structurally. What internal changes need to be happening alongside of those to make sure that these things really work?
Right. So while legal is the driving force, you really need to work with your internal clients, right? And as Carl mentioned, sort of the low code, no code, there's a ton of technology out there. You can have a lot of bells and whistles, but you really have to understand what can you embrace and automate, and without really having what I would call operational disruption, right? Like you can't really deploy something that your business is not going to adopt. It's not going to create those efficiencies and items like that. So it's really important to get that, call it cross-functional buy-in, to understand how can you actually move things forward, as opposed to, again, creating more of a disruption.
I think, and this is sort of a question for both of you, I think, but it is sort of fundamentally not like a legal function to be agile. I mean, legal functions are occupied with risk, and they're concerned about risk, and potential costs, and how do you square that sort of that focus on risk, legal risk, with being agile? I mean, is there a trade-off there, or can you do both?
I don't think there's a trade-off. I think really you can be agile while mitigating your risk, understanding your compliance, and making sure that you're entering into contracts that are, consistent with your risk profile. But it requires a lot of homework. I mean, any type of adoption of legal technology requires homework, getting your templates done, figuring out your policies, processes, etc. It's really understanding the risk profiles of how you either go to market with your clients or accept vendors. So, it's real easy to try and identify like a tiered risk review, right? What are the contracts that that don't touch client data, don't touch, confidential information that you can really streamline with little to no legal review? Then what's the medium contracts that require some sort of threshold review? And then of course you have the ones that, are escalated. But again, if you have a process or policy by which you can review those, you can quickly figure out what's going on and make a decision from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Carl, I guess the same question, but also with kind of the added sort of flavor of AI and new technology, new legal technology, makes it even more concerning that legal risk is top of the radar. So how do you navigate using those kinds of tools?
Yeah, I mean, I love Ron's analogy there, right? I mean, we look at a world now that we live in now. We don't live in a world where policies are now buried in PDFs, right? I think we're seeing commonly now where customers are adopting low-code, no technologies. They're taking those low-code platforms and they're embedding those processes in an automated fashion. Approvals, risk checks, document routing, all this happens automatically. Compliance effectively becomes part of the workflow. It's not an afterthought. It's not a risk. It's actually part of how they're actually driving execution. Low code lets legal teams create self-service tools, right? You can automate the NDAs. You can automate contract request portals. This is where business users really are moving fast within the guardrails, the guide rails of compliance. You get an agility on the front line, but legal still owns the parameters, and importantly, owns a very strong audit trail. I think that's a massively impactful area. I love what Ron said there, and we've got some great use cases where that's being adopted successfully in the market.
Absolutely. I think it can be. I totally agree with what you're saying, and I think it can be very overwhelming. I think for legal teams, especially legal teams early on this journey. They hear that there's all these things that they need to think about, and there's internal factors, there's technology factors, there's process factors, and it can be just an overwhelming kind of journey for people to go on. So for a team looking to go on that journey, where do they begin? Where's the sensible place for them to start to actually move the needle and then make sure that they're going and progressing down in the right way?
If I can, I think you first have to identify both the blockers and the pain points. And there's sort of two perspectives. The first is, it, right? You know where your weaknesses are, where you're not meeting your client's requests and requirements. And then you also have to solicit the feedback, right, of your internal business clients. What can we do to make you more efficient? What can we do to make you more successful? Yeah. And once you understand what those initial pain points or blockers are, you again kind of have to look at yourself in the mirror. What can you as a legal department actually implement that's going to make you more efficient, again, without biting off that operational disruption that I mentioned before? And then you really have to understand, are your business clients going to adopt and utilize it, right? I mean, often it's kind of easy to put in a contract request approval policy via, low code, no code, but are you going to have the CIO log into a CLM solution, go into a document, redline it, or, so you have to figure out what can you bite off and what's going to make you most efficient, and then identify the KPIs that are going to allow you to consistently improve over time.
Absolutely.
Spot on.
Yeah, fantastic. And I suppose, Carl, from your perspective, I mean, the importance of that technology layer, like what is the starting point? How do you go on that journey as an organization?
Great. And then this is where the biggest fear factor comes in for a lot of our clients, right? I guess the key thing is don't chase the moon, right? You've got to fix the friction first. The most successful legal operations teams and the programs they're working on seeing today, they're starting with tangible problems. Is it intake? Is it NDAs? Is it approvals? Where can they prove value fast before scaling? Because then you get, obviously, you get support, the confidence of the business. keep technology tactical, right? The tactical layer, those simple repeatable automations, it's what unlocks the momentum. And when people see it working, you'll drive adoption, you'll drive the right culture. That kind of not invented here, this is the way we've already done it. It is no longer an issue. Those are two areas where I think those companies that are taking that crawl, walk, run model are having the most measurable success right now, Shez.
Absolutely. And this is a consistent theme, I think, through this conversation. It's, move fast, agile, momentum, not trying to run, not shooting the moon, but getting somewhere, starting moving quickly. How have you seen this done well? Like, have you seen examples of this being implemented the right way? Have you seen examples of this being implemented the wrong way? And what's the difference between those two experiences?
Would you like me or Carl?
Yeah, Ron, please.
Unfortunately, we've seen both. I walked into a situation at OSG where it was really adopted the wrong way. Number one is I think they, found, for example, a CLM, contract lifecycle management solution that had all the bells and whistles. And with that, they decided to track every single term and condition that they would ever consider, none of which they would ever use in practice. So they spent a ton of time, a ton of money tracking all these agreements and attributes that they would never utilize, right? And we actually had to essentially do a 180 from that standpoint, is go in, take a look at the CLM, realize that we were paying a lot of money for something that A, we weren't really using for all of its features, and B, recognizing that we were spending time and money tracking metadata and attributes that we were never going to use. And ultimately what we did is we decided to go with, you guessed it, a low code, no code solution that really met what our important legal and business processes were. We minimized the features and functions that we were using. We specifically limited the metadata and attributes to the key data that was going to run the business. And it's been fantastic.
And if I may share, just build and even compliment Ron and his team there, right? I mean, I think that what Ron and the team took the step change in doing, they didn't look at low code, no code as a technology, as a toolkit. They looked at it as an operational capability, right? Is it going to give the team the ability to design, deploy, and adjust the workflows they need without being, again, that whole thing waiting on IT for months to drive things forward? It's that agility that's really allowed them to really move from reactive to proactive and drive a really big change in the business. I think what he shares, where we're collaborating in the market right now, in the OTA and low code minds, we've seen organizations move from, I would say, static policy-based processes to dynamic automated ones, embedding compliance, getting those approvals in place, having that auditability, that whole end-to-end visibility within the structure is absolutely key. And we're showing that it works. And I think Ron has reinforced it there with the approach they've taken with CLM.
Absolutely. Guys, this is fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing the insight. And I realize we're coming up to time here, and I just want to ask one more question of you both. What is sort of one takeaway principle that you would give to a lawyer, a GC, a head of legal operations to pin their strategy on, to focus their direction and their effort around? What is sort of like a nugget that you would give them? Ron, maybe we start with you. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, I think I actually said it before. It's really important to look in the mirror and figure out, what do you need to change? What do you need to implement? So again, you hear it from your clients, but you also know yourself, where can you be more efficient? Where can you do a better job? And I think it's really starting with that and then branching out and understanding, what do you think the business can adopt as well? It's not just what you can push through, it's what you think the business can adopt it and how the two of you can work together sort of in tango. That would be my first statement.
Fabulous. And Carl, same from you, please.
Yeah, I love Ron's answer there. Actually, I'm not going to top it, but I mean, if I could give one principle to a GC or a head of legal ops, right, it would be design for speed, right? You can govern for trust by the way that we adopt again those processes, that compliance within the automation of workflows. The key thing here is to get the legal teams to drive the business to move faster. You can make it safe within the guardrails, and you can do so with really earning more credibility and impact from the execution of it. And when we've seen that time and time again. And I'll go back to Ron's example of what OSG are doing with CLM. It's a prime example there of how they've driven change within the business, and they've sped up effectively the ability to better serve their customers and better improve their internal processes. So.
Fantastic. Well, that's thank you so much, both of you, and all that's left to say really is really appreciate both of your insight here. I guess, look, the message here is, really about reiterating that scaling legal operations is not just a technology transformation, it's an operating model and a mindset transformation, and it requires fundamentally to look at the operation and the business in a different way. So thanks again, Ron and Carl, for your time, and thank you everybody for joining us for this quick chat. And please reach out if you have any further questions or you'd like to discuss this any further. But that's all. And thank you both for your time.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Shaz. Appreciate it. Have a good one.